Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders with their cybersecurity strategies and solutions. With me on today's show are Paul Beckman, Chief Information Security Officer, Department of Homeland Security; Ron Pointnes, Deputy Commander, U.S. Army; John Davis, Vice President, Public Sector, Palo Alto Networks; Donald Heckman, Deputy CIO and Deputy CISO at Department of Defense; Chris Usserman, Principal Security Architect and Chief Security Officer, Infoblox Federal; and James Yeager, Vice President, Public Sector, CrowdStrike. Well, we've got a lot of activity going on in the cyber world. As always, I was just out at CES and I was just blown away by all the IoT devices out there, the AI, the ML that was out there, and a lot of buzzwords out there these days in regards to zero trust, and I know there's resiliency and threat matrices, et cetera, but it seems interesting that at the end of the day, we're still into how do we reskill our workforce, how do we maintain our workforce, how do we make sure that we have good cyber hygiene so that we don't end up in a situation like we've had in numerous occasions, right? Paul, we're going to start with you and just give us the state of the state. What's happening at DHS these days in regards to your cyber program?
You nailed a couple of the big points that we're working on right now, Luke. So zero trust is going to be probably the biggest thrust that we're working on right now, building the foundations of zero trust. The one thing I like to say about zero trust is, it's not something that you need to go out and buy a solution for. It's getting back to the basics, getting back to the principles. I like to say what's old is new again. So we are building the foundations of zero trust without any new procurements.
Let me put you on the spot there. Give us 30 seconds on what is zero trust for the audience so they understand it. Just layman's terms.
Zero trust is that, at the end of the day, trust no one and nothing. In the old days, you used to have the perimeter where everything internal to that perimeter was trusted and everything external was the untrusted. Zero trust implies that there is no distinction between the two. I don't trust you whether you're internal or external to the network. So one of the basic principles is I will authenticate you, force authentication for every transaction that you do on the network. When I talk about getting back to the basics of zero trust, it is least privilege principle. This has been a network security principle that's been around for a very long time, but it is truly enacting least privilege all across your network and everywhere that gets executed.
A lot of activity going on at DHS. Ron, I know there's a lot of activity going on at Army. You guys have your cyber command stood up over there. Tell us what's happening in the Army.
Yeah, so we've really made a lot of progress over the last year on really understanding all of our network, because you think about the scope and scale of the Army, about 1.1 million users, and so you really have to have awareness of who all your users are and what's happening on the network. And so the progress we've made with our big data platform and what we call Gabriel Nimbus, where we ingest all the sensor and network data into that, and so really using that automated tools. We're making good progress of standardizing the tools to enable us to patch faster. And I would tell you the third one is really putting the processes in place and dealing with the culture in the Army that says, I need to be able to patch now because the adversary is not going to wait. And so that is a culture we're dealing with. But a lot of good progress.
Really focusing on the immediate now and making sure that these things are up to par, because we're down to 0-day type situations these days, right? John, I know that Palo Alto has done a whole bunch of work across the federal service, DoD, and across the private sector as well. Give us a little state of the state about sort of what you're seeing out there these days.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. In terms of progress, what I'm seeing some of the more effective organizations do, and I characterize it this way, is moving away from 3 different types of legacy approaches toward more modern, effective, innovative approaches. One of them is moving away from an over-reliance on people. Not that people aren't important, they are very important, but you'll never have enough people to do everything that's required. So moving away from an over-reliance on people to the better use of automation and software-based advanced analytics, like big data analytics, machine learning, deep learning, behavioral analytics, and AI. The second trend is that organizations are moving away from a outside-in approach where the focus is on the perimeter and keeping bad things out and trusting what's inside, to a focus from the inside out and shrinking down those visibility and security controls to the lowest possible level. And this has a lot to do with what Paul said, the zero trust concept. And then the third trend that I'm seeing is the journey to the cloud, a move away from a total reliance on on-prem security towards cloud, and clouds of different type, public, private, hybrid, multi-cloud, and even SaaS. And that organizations have found that cloud provides all kinds of advantages, but security is a challenge. And so the organizations who do that best are able to address those security challenges in the cloud.
Yeah, you really, when you get into those cloud environments, you're really extending that responsibility, if you will. You're not advocating it or releasing it, but you're certainly extending it. And it does make it more complicated, right? All of a sudden the networking pieces, et cetera, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, start to come into play and create some vulnerabilities there that you have to watch out for. Don, how about over at DoD? I know you guys have a lot of activity going on. We've heard in the news about the cybersecurity maturity model certification and some other things. What's the state of the state and progress in regards to the DoD environment?
Yeah, so I think in DoD, we, as part of the CIO's digital modernization strategy, a key piece of that is our cybersecurity strategy and our risk reduction and how do we continue to make improvements. So we've been, again, continuing to make good progress on our cyber hygiene initiatives that we were doing. Are we getting our operating systems to the most current version? Are they configured correctly? Do they all have valid authorities to operate? And then we're really focused on how do we move forward with, as you heard, visibility of all the endpoints. You can't protect what you don't know. So we're working on that. You did mention the cyber maturity model that's being worked. Defense industrial base is a critical component.
Sure.
Not only for us, but for the entire nation, if you think critical infrastructure and others. And so what we're looking at is how do we actually ensure that our defense industrial base are implementing those security requirements to protect their networks and our information, because a lot of our information resides on their networks.
Right, and there's been case after case after case of these collateral systems, these tertiary systems that have been exposed with vulnerabilities, right, rolled over, and then all of a sudden they come in looking like a credentialed user, and the rest is history, right? A lot of these situations that we've seen in the past are that. And it's interesting to hear that we're still talking about sort of blocking and tackling, right? We're still talking about hygiene, which used to be so difficult, is still tough to do, but with a lot of this automation now, much easier than it was in the past, right? But the vulnerabilities and the attacks seem to be the same old kind of situations there. Paul, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just want to footstep exactly the point that you're making and that I alluded to earlier. We're still getting back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
Patch management. If you can learn how to harden your systems, manage, i.e. patch your systems, and monitor your systems, you've solved 99% of the problem 99% of the time. But yeah, it just continues to seem to be such a challenge to really become brilliant with the basics, but that's exactly what we need to do.
Brilliant with the basics, I like that. I read a report the other day on just ransomware and how a lot of these municipalities are getting had, and it's just such basic things. It's really unfortunate to see that. Chris, I know that InfoBlocks is right in the middle of helping to sort of secure the community at large. Why don't we start with it for a minute? Just give us 30 seconds on what is InfoBlocks so the audience understands that, and then where are you and what are you seeing out there as far as progress?
Sure. InfoBlocks, and specifically InfoBlocks Federal, we focus on obviously the federal government and a lot of the public sector, but that is in delivering technologies and information, actionable intelligence and such for the sake of understanding the core network services, managing core network services around DHCP, DNS, and understanding around what's actually on your network, which actually produces network intelligence, and then correlating that with DNS activity. One of the things that's most interesting about that is that unfortunately the span of maturity of organizations, both public sector and private, is still hugely varied in very simplistic gaps that are there, such as we talk about cyber hygiene. And I still see this in agencies today, all the way up to organizations that are really embracing automation and orchestration. Those that are most effectively doing that because of the gap in personnel, you really need you need two things in the network, and that is network intelligence, knowing what's on your network, and knowing the expanses of your enterprise. And that extends beyond your brick and mortar. It goes to the home network of your employees because they take their resources home and are operating there and don't have the resources that you have in your offices. And network intelligence to be able to bring that contextualization together. But when you tie all of that into one cohesive, mature model, you have skilled people, you have living processes that are proven, and you have technologies that are integrated together to be able to automate and execute on those playbooks in a measure of scale that the human alone can't do.
Yeah, it's that age-old sort of what's on your network, right? And I think all of us went through that, right? We put CDM and some of these other programs out there, tools out there, and the place lit up like a Christmas tree, right? We found all kinds of things that we didn't realize. And then, who's on your network, et cetera. James, tell us, let's face it, we've heard about CrowdStrike in the news in one form or another, but, maybe people don't really understand what CrowdStrike is and what you do and sort of the federal community at large. So why don't you give us 30 seconds on what is CrowdStrike, and then talk about what you're doing in regards to the federal community.
Yeah, sure. And any news is good news, as they say, right?
Sure, absolutely, 100%.
Maybe, right?
CrowdStrike. Yeah, I've heard that before, right?
We've heard that a few times. Yeah, especially in this town. So, so we're in the endpoint protection space, a space that's awfully crowded, right? We all know that for sure. The distinguishing factor for CrowdStrike is that we are 100% cloud native, right? And so what I mean by that is our platform and every capability that's derived from the platform is engineered and delivered via a single lightweight agent from the cloud. So we're not retrofitting a legacy solution to be able to run in a data center and calling it cloud. And so there's a lot of benefits naturally for that, right? We're focusing on driving cost and complexity out of the environment for our customers. And frankly, as the government panelists are well aware, and certainly on the industry side too, you're dealing with agent bloat, right? We talk to customers all the time that we have anywhere from agent bloat, right?
Okay, so what is that for the layman? So
just a ton of agents taking up residence on your endpoints and servers, right? We talk to customers.
Pieces of software on there trying to do different things.
Your mileage can vary, right? But we've spoken to customers who've got 10 agents. We've spoken to customers who've got 60 agents, right? And so naturally, it's hard to do effective security that way. And so we're spending a lot of time coaching our customers on how to do more with less. One case in particular, and obviously I'm not going to be able to mention the name of the agency for reasons that will be obvious to all of us, but with the acquisition and the deployment of CrowdStrike, we helped a customer in a matter of weeks identify 7 agents that they could reduce from their footprint, right?
Okay.
And so just imagine the amount of IOPS and resources and efficiencies that can be gained there, and obviously the economic benefit. The other thing that I would just say that we're spending a lot of time on, and it'll dovetail off of Don's comment, which is visibility. I couldn't agree with him more, by the way. At CrowdStrike, we place a massive, massive premium on the telemetry and the information that you gather about the adversary, right? How can you know who you're defending yourself against if you don't know the adversary themselves? And so threat intelligence and infusing that threat intelligence beyond just IOCs and finished intelligence and reporting, by the way, contextual intelligence, bringing that down to the endpoint so that we can improve the security apparatus and enhance the security program overall is a big area of focus for CrowdStrike at this time.
Really thinning that out, simplifying it, and making sure that we get to the left of boom, as they like to say, right?
Right.
Ron, let's talk about priorities for the next upcoming year. I know you all have a lot of activity going on. Give us, your top 2 or 3 priorities, things that you're focusing on that you want to get done in this new decade of 2020, right? Yeah.
So, let's do with 3.
Sure.
First, in concert with building what Don said, Mr. DC, as a DoD CIO, one of his priorities is comply to connect. And that really is, validate, authenticating every user that comes on the network. And so all the services are working in that direction. And there will be, it's not intended to be a single tool or set of tools, but kind of a suite, cocktail of tools across the services. So that is a priority. A second priority, and it builds, I think, what James was talking about, is having the right automated tools that really allow us to have the speed of patching. Speed is critical in this, and that's, as Paul went there earlier, it's the adversaries are moving much faster than our traditional processes. And so the configuration management, the patch management, but the speed of patching is incredible. And not directly related to cybersecurity, but it's a big deal. Our command, the headquarters, is moving this year from the Washington, D.C. area to Fort Gordon, Georgia, near Augusta, Georgia. So that is obviously a big priority for the command. Right now we're spread across 11 different facilities in the Washington, D.C. area, and we're moving into a new headquarters at Fort Gordon. And so you'll have the operational part of the cyber part of the Army, along with the institutional that's already at Fort Gordon with the Cyber Center of Excellence. So those are kind of three big priorities for fiscal year 20.
A lot of activity in 2020.
Right.
John, how about at Palo Alto? What do you, what maybe the priorities of Palo Alto, but maybe the priorities of what the agencies are asking you to do, right, going forward, and what you're needing to do to respond to that in the next year?
Sure. Our priorities are based on our strategy. Mm-hmm. And our strategy is comprised of three interrelated lines of effort. The first one is our bread and butter, secure the enterprise. So even though I mentioned earlier about this journey to the cloud, we see for the foreseeable future it's going to be a hybrid environment with on-prem capabilities, still a big requirement, especially in government and especially in DoD. So being able to provide next generation firewall capabilities and subscriptions, that's part of that line of effort. The second is the journey to the cloud and helping organizations with that journey from a total reliance on on-prem to cloud of different types, and being able to help organizations in the shared security model. The last line of effort deals with securing the future. And this is about providing detection, investigation, automation, and response capabilities for security operations, so that you begin to automate as much as possible, and you free up your people to be able to focus on the most serious threats.
Yeah, really, as they say, being able to find the needle in a stack of needles, right, is super important. And I quite frankly think that a hybrid environment is here to stay, right? I don't think you're ever going to have a pure cloud play. You're certainly not going to have a pure legacy play, and there's always going to be that mix and match. And I think also, as talking to a lot of the CIOs, a lot of complexity when you start to get into these multi-cloud environments. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. You've been listening to the Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network. With me on today's show are Paul Beckman with Department of Homeland Security, Ron Pontius with U.S. Army Cyber, John Davis, Palo Alto Networks, Donald Heckman with the Department of Defense, Chris Usserman with Infoblox, and James Yeager with CrowdStrike. Paul, we were just talking about priorities for this coming year in 2020. What are you guys looking at? What are you focusing on? I know there's a lot of stuff going on there. Ooh. Give us your top 3 or 4 that you're focusing your attention on.
Yeah, we are busy. As you know, I've been working on this concept of our SOC optimization for the last year.
Right.
That's going to be one of my biggest priorities this year. Mm-hmm. Part of that SOC optimization is emulating what DoD has done, where we are establishing these required levels of maturity that each SOC needs to live up to. And if you pass an assessment indicating that you have met that maturity level, you get designated as a center of excellence able to not only provide that service for yourself, but offer that as a service to anyone else that would like to consume that service from you.
Oh, that's an excellent idea.
So
I like
by the end of the year, I should know. I will have all the assessments done, and I will know who my centers of excellences are and who will need to move over to a center of excellence.
Okay,
so that's going to be a primary thrust for that SOC optimization.
Sounds like a good strategy.
Second, CDM continues to march on. We are going to. I'm hoping to be able to wrap up phase 2, or at least get close to it by the end of this year. As you had indicated, phase 1 being what's on your network, phase 2 still being who's on your network.
Sure.
And really getting our arms around that priv and cred management. And then the last piece is something that is near and dear to our new CIO, Beth Capella's heart, and she has made it a priority, which is POAM remediation. We are going in with a laser-like focus, getting our arms around all of the existing plan of action and milestones that we have on these systems.
AKA POAM. I was going to ask you to say what that was. Yeah.
And getting those remediated. It's amazing what happens when leadership.
And so, what is that? Just for people, what is is that sort of you find something and then just so people understand.
So if you go through the risk management framework, identification,
Sure.
selection, implementation of controls, when you get to assessment, you are assessing all of those controls, and any control that you fail to meet. Meaning that that's not there, that security requirement is not there, you turn that into a plan of action and milestone to remediate.
And
so
then you start working it off, sort of like a punch list almost, right?
Yeah. So I'm very happy. Like I was about to say, that it's amazing what happens when leadership makes things a priority. We are closing POAMs and remediating POAMs like I've never seen before.
Yeah, and Beth Capella, as you mentioned, coming from an operating component, has a laser focus on that. I think that's good for the community to stay focused on these things, tighten it up. That's all about the cyber hygiene, right? That leads to good results when you do that. Chris, how about at InfoBlocks? You guys are out there working in that federal community. You've got some priorities of your own, and certainly your agencies are doing things, or asking you to do things that are creating priorities. Tell us what this next year looks like for you guys.
Sure. One of the things that we're really helping our clients with is making that bridge to cloud. In the hybrid environment, one of the big challenges there is visibility. Understanding what resources I have in the cloud environment and tying that in with a single pane of glass back to what's on my network as well. And then obviously containment and security. How do we extend those security profiles and moment in time, in real time protections and alerting to resources when they're off premise? That's where they're at their most risk for being able to be attacked. We hear often going to a local coffee shop and hooking up to the Wi-Fi and getting attacked at that point. Same thing can happen wherever you are, whether you're on your home network, whether you're at some other company or some other location, some other office whose security posture is not as good as yours. You're always at risk for it. The biggest challenge is that when are you alerted when there's some problem? We're trying to close the gap on that alerting from, the mean time to detection I saw on one metric last year was 179 days between infection and detection. That should be nearly instantaneous. And we're trying to help customers get to that point.
Wow, that's kind of scary. Yeah, and I was, that there's these statistics out there about the home networks, et cetera, and how many devices are connected to a home network and that type of thing. So there's all kinds of, threat vectors there in regards to those kind of environments that, sort of open that aperture up, right?
And if I could follow up with that, that's one of the challenges, for the folks here from the government side is that you have a network that's within their span of control. But the span of influence extends beyond that, to the fact that our U.S. enterprise actually is as far down, one could argue it goes as far down as the municipalities and the school districts, because you have target by association. Our adversaries don't really care of the delineation between, who's responsible for federal, for state, for local, for school district. All they care about is, I just defaced a website at some obscure network or some school district or a county in Texas. And they take credit for that. And it's targeting the U.S. enterprise. So we kind of have to take a holistic approach to the defense of that.
Sure. Don, how about over at DoD? I know you've got a lot of activity on over there. I know that Mr. Deasley has been on site there for over a year now, laid out a whole bunch of priorities, including cyber. Ron talked a little bit about that. What does next year look like as far as what you want to get accomplished, what your priorities and your focus are going to be for the upcoming year?
Yeah, thanks. So you talked about Mr. Deasy's, he's got this digital modernization strategy, has 4 key components: cloud, artificial intelligence, improved command control communications, and security. And so of which security really supports all those. And so big focus next year is ensuring we have the right security requirements for the clouds. And I'll say clouds because we're a multi-cloud environment. We will have general purpose and fit for purpose clouds. Artificial intelligence, we recently established a joint AI center.
Had those folks on the show a while ago talking about that.
And key there is how do we have the right security for artificial intelligence, right? And so that gets back to data protection of where the data is stored, how it's processed, and things like that. Secure DevOps, right? So how do you get capabilities to the warfighter quicker? How do you develop things in such a way that they inherit security controls so that you can rapidly deploy capabilities? So big focus for my organization is how do we do that faster? Depending on who you talk to, there's sometimes horror stories about how long it takes to accredit and get a particular capability out to the field, 90, 180 days, right? We'd like to shrink that down to be much more effective. And then you heard Ron talk about, comply to connect. And so as a part of that, and I want to foot stomp what Paul had said, right? Getting back to basics, really. How do we do things better, right? How do we ensure we asset visibility, see all the endpoints in the network? How do we ensure they're properly configured before you let them connect? The people, how do we identify through improved identity, credential, and access management? But not only for people, how about remote processes? There are, our financial community and others are looking at how do they leverage automation to do things better. So how do you ensure that those are authorized processes that are running and tracked? And so we're doing all that. And then I'd like to foot stomp the people, right? We have been rolling out our cyber accepted service. We continue to make good progress on that.
What is that, so people know, just understand what that means?
So Congress gave us the authority, recognizing that we were having challenging in attracting and retaining professionals in the cybersecurity area. So they gave us the ability to onboard people faster, special pay scales so that we can provide some additional pay, retention bonuses, additional funds for training. And so we started with a pilot. We did it with Cyber Command and some other organizations. Navy Marine Corps came on. Air Force is coming on this year, and then Army is coming on soon after. So the goal then is to allow us to recruit and retain cyber professionals across all our
super
skills.
Important to do that, right? I mean, of all the skills, and there's plenty of them, and certainly this was one of the ones where, the private sector and the public sector are sort of competing with that, it seems like, all the time. And I know AI is a big piece of trying to help, sort of automate some of these things. There's some great stuff going on in the Air Force with Kessel Run, with your DevSecOps, et cetera. Let's roll over to a different subject. Before we do that, though, we're gonna reach out to you, James, and talk about priorities for 2020. And next, we'll talk about lessons learned. But let's start with priorities that you're seeing at CrowdStrike in regards to what does the next year look like, and what are you guys going to be focusing your attention on?
Yeah, sure. So conveniently, I also have 3, and they're occupying a ton of our time and energy. The first I would say is CMMC. I know Don mentioned it earlier. First, let me just give credit to the Defense Department for endeavoring to implement this model. This is not new guidance, right? We've had guidance from NIST in the past. The challenge, I think, historically is just as humans, we either chase the carrot or we fear the stick, right? And 800-171 really lacked any punitive element, right? So I think it kind of got a meh after a while from DoD and from the integrator community. But we have mapped all of our solutions to the varying levels, and granted, it's an evolution, right? The model is not yet completely in its finished state, but we're putting packages and solutions around to help not only the Defense Department, but also the DIB partners that are working to secure the federal supply chain and spending countless hours every year supporting DoD. So that's a priority. The second is cloud compliance, right? So we currently occupy a leading position in cloud compliance at the endpoint level, but our work is not done, right? So currently we're operating in GovCloud at the FedRAMP moderate baseline level, but we are going to be pursuing, or we're underway with our pursuit of FedRAMP high, and also working with DISA to achieve impact level 5 this coming year. And so these are major engineering initiatives, as most of you likely know. So we've secured provisional authorizations on both the civilian side and the defense side to partner with us as this pursuit carries forward. But that will occupy a lot of time this coming year. And then the final thing I'll say is relative to artificial intelligence and the concept of big data and big threat data, and also the cloud, there's some continuing education that I think that needs to get done. We all recognize that. But local telemetry about what's going on in your environment really only tells a partial story and a partial truth, right? So we're encouraging our customers to zoom out. You use the word aperture, to open the aperture a little bit, Luke, so that we can see the threat and context of the threat in a more global view. If you think of the way security operators and InfoSec professionals work today, if they're inspecting their environment and they get an alert, they make observations, they make an assessment. It's either good, it's bad, it's black, or it's white, right? And certainly if it's unique, there's a reaction there, right? But we'd be naive to think that something that you're seeing in your environment, which may be unique to you, is unique in a global sense, right? So zooming out, providing additional threat telemetry about what others may be seeing that can help inform you to make more actionable decisions with confidence about how to respond to the threat in your environment, that takes some education. And in all reality, in order to be able to do that, you need to have access to troves and troves of data. And the federal enterprise just doesn't have the budget or the capacity to store that. So the only way to really effectively do that is to take it to the cloud. And so we're spending a lot of time on that initiative and educating our customers there today.
Synthesizing that, et cetera. Well, we want to roll over and talk about, as I mentioned, lessons learned. I think this is really important. All of you have been at this for quite some time. Paul, we're going to start with you at DHS. And you just sort of, give us a few lessons learned, pluses and minuses, either way, so that, the listening audience out there can learn from sort of the various activities that you've embarked on in the journey that DHS has been on.
The two biggest lessons learned I would probably bring up, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, especially with respect to zero trust, is you do not need to go out and spend any money with respect to starting to build the foundations of these secure infrastructures. You do not go after the latest beeping shiny whistle. Start building the basics and get to it that way. The other good lesson learned that we had over the last year was this concept of the authority to proceed. One of the directives given to me when I first got the job was that we had to figure out how, to Ron's point and Don's point, how we keep up with the speed of mission. And the existing FISMA framework with respect to getting a system certified and accredited just was not able to do that. So when we came up with this concept of the authority to proceed, out of the NIST 800-53 controls, and there's 600 plus of them, we eked out 35 critical controls. These were the
bare bones.
The bona fide bare bones. Back to my point is, can you harden your system? Can you configure your systems based on the DISA STIGs, security technical implementation guides? Can you manage and patch your systems, and can you monitor your systems? And that was about 35 key controls that kind of constituted those three capabilities, and where we said that, if you can really do those 35 well, we'll buy you a year to get into production. You can get into production right now, and that'll buy you a year while you work on the rest of those controls to get that properly certified and accredited. So that was a very valuable lesson learned. It enabled us, to a large degree, to keep up with the mission.
Yeah, really enable those operators. That's what it's all about. But you're really talking about balancing and managing risk, right?
Yes,
that's what you're talking about here, is a way
striking
to
that balance to really make sure that due diligence is applied, but enabling ops.
John, how about at Palo Alto? I know you guys see a large footprint of activity out there. Maybe some lessons learned about what you're seeing out there in regards to as everyone embarks on this journey of zero trust and everything else. that
Sure,
we're trying to
Luke.
get to.
And I want to build on what Paul said. So this is all in regard to the whole zero trust concept. First lesson, why is this so important? I don't think anybody here would disagree that we're living in an age of unprecedented growth in modern technology. That's information technology, operational technology, and even IoT as we start connecting everything everywhere. And that brings unprecedented benefits from a social and economic perspective, but it also brings dangers. Especially when you look at IoT, you're talking about increasing the attack surface 10x or more. And when you talk about 5G, you're talking about the ability to increase speed. So, and that goes for not just the benefits, but the dangers. And I think that it's not hyperbole to say that it's not just about speed and scale. The dangers are also about impact. When you start connecting mass transportation systems and life-sustaining devices to this environment, now it's not hyperbole to say we could be putting people's lives at risk if we don't build security into these systems.
Things get very complicated very quickly, don't they?
Yes, absolutely. So, getting back to what I said earlier about changing the approach, a legacy approach from the outside in to inside out. Step one in zero trust is to figure out what's most important to protect. Start there. In the military, we called it cyber key terrain. In the vernacular of zero trust, it's called the protect surface. But starting there to get to the point where you're trust nothing, verify everything. Your verification controls are you shrink them down so that you end up with a model that says only authorized users are allowed to do authorized functions using authorized applications with authorized content and data from authorized devices. That is where you're trying to get to. And what we've learned is it's a journey. You don't end up with there's no final product. This is not a product, it's a journey. This is something that you have to continue to mature. And so what we've learned is there's a maturity model in achieving this type of thing. Step one, to get to about the 80% solution, you identify the users and applications, you put users into functional buckets, and then you apply policies so that you're able to control what your users and applications are doing. Step two, to get to about the 90% model, you do that with devices. You identify the devices on your network, you put them into small functional buckets, you figure out which devices can talk or which buckets can talk to which other buckets, and you apply policies. But you never get to 100% because it's zero trust. Sure. So you have to continue to iterate.
Right, and we're back to sort of what's on the network and then who's on the network and getting back into that situation where and look, that's evolving and changing all the time, and the tool sets are getting more and more mature in regards to that. Well, we're gonna loop back and ask the rest of the folks for some lessons learned, but we're gonna take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network. With me on today's show are Paul Beckman with Department of Homeland Security, Ron Pointius with U.S. Army Cyber, John Davis with Palo Alto Networks, Donald Heckman with Department of Defense, Chris Usserman with Infoblox, and James Yeager with CrowdStrike. We were talking about lessons learned. I'm going to throw it over to you, Ron, and ask that you paint a picture, lessons learned that you've discovered, pluses or minus, as you've gone on this journey in the Army.
I'm going to bring in a different aspect of this, and first the challenge.
Sure.
We all know we're in competition for talent. Finding the right IT and cybersecurity professionals is a challenge, not only for the federal government, state and local governments, industry, et cetera, et cetera. So a lesson learned is we step back because we're a worldwide command, not only across every base, Army base across the United States, but Europe, Middle East, Asia, and so we have a bit of an aging workforce, and we were finding ourselves unable to keep up with those who are retiring. So working with the Army Civilian Human Resource Agency, we consolidated into a center of excellence, what was previously 59 personnel centers.
Wow.
And we hired a civilian recruiting firm to partner with that center of excellence And we were able to completely change the dynamics within about 10 months, really able to get to the left, to get to young men and women, recent college graduates that wouldn't normally be looking at or thinking there was opportunities available in the government, let alone in the Army. And we made tremendous progress. We're offering summer internships now to college students or 2-year fellowships to recent college graduates. And this is consistent with the overall, the Army published the Army People Strategy in December that really focuses on the acquire, develop, employ, and retain, and saying, let's understand that it all starts with the people. You got to marry it with the technology and processes, but the people are incredibly important. So that's a lesson learned, how we've changed the dynamics to bring talent into the Army.
Big time, and I know that you know that there's a lot of assessing, you know, tests that are being assessed now on folks to see how, you know, the applicability of how well they'll be able to adopt to learning some of these technologies and turn them into these cyber ninjas, as we like to say, right? Don, how about at DoD? I know there's got to be a whole bunch of lessons learned there as you guys are on your way through this journey of these various activities and priorities that you laid out.
Yeah, I'd like to say, I mean, I agree with what Paul said and Ron and John, but you know, I kind of had listed here, people are our most important element of any initiative. And then next, with people comes culture. I think I heard talk about, you know, you really need to work on culture. Culture's a challenge, you know, and making sure everybody understands cybersecurity is their responsibility. They have a responsibility. It's not somebody else's job. It's everybody's job. And then I liked what Jim and Chris had said, right? I think sometimes simple's better. We continue to want to chase the shiny object. We keep adding more agents onto our endpoints to the point where they won't function, right? And so if it's too complex,
create your own denial of service, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I like, you know, how do we be proactive versus reactive? How do we get more threat intelligence? How do we threat-informed risk, you know, that drives our risk processes to allow us to implement things faster? And so I really like the authority to proceed approach that DHS is doing. And so I think those are some of our lessons learned that we're.
And I like that where it starts with the people. You know, Marine Corps has a mentality. You know, every Marine is a rifleman. You know, and I always used to say that. You know, every employee has to be a cyber professional, has to be a cyber warrior at some length. James, how about at CrowdStrike? I'm sure you have some lessons learned out there. Maybe a couple of the top couple that you'd like to highlight there for the listening audience.
Sure, yeah. So obviously coming at this from a little bit of a different angle on the industry side, but I think one thing we can all agree to is that enterprise security at scale, or doing it successfully, is not easy, right? And so when we talk about an enterprise, we're not always talking about a single enterprise. We're talking about, in DoD's case, a collection of massive enterprises, right? Not hundreds of thousands of endpoints, millions of endpoints. And so, and the engineering behind some of these technologies makes it that way. All the brick and mortar, as Chris mentioned, and all the bent metal, the architecture just is not there to sustain that success at scale. So one of the things that we're really encouraging, we're spending some time on the Hill and talking to federal executives about this, is can we do testing in a more effective way, right? Let's not continue to test in a lab. Let's not test on 5, 10, 100 endpoints, and let's not test for a week, right? Those conditions are not emblematic, and they don't replicate what the real world looks like for an enterprise. And so you don't really get a chance to really inspect whether or not you're going to be able to accommodate the threat vectors that you're going to be encountering on a day-to-day basis. And so we've got to get bigger. We've got to do it in an operational environment. We've got to be able to see real threats, and we've got to be able to test on thousands and thousands of endpoints before decisions are made about, you know, are we going to get into a situation where we continue to throw good money after bad?
Bringing up some good points, and we're at that time in the show where we like to kind of wrap it up and ask everyone to paint a picture of the future. You know, if we fast forward 3 years, you know, what's that situation? What's that environment going to be like? James, we'll start with you at the end of the table there, and just give us a couple of minutes on what does it look like.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we need to really raise the stakes in the realm of security and create new measures and standards of excellence when it comes to security. And really what I'm talking about here is attempting to do security in real time, okay? We talk to departments and agencies each and every day, and we're witnessing engagements where dwell times from the adversary are measured in multiple months, right? And I think we all recognize the damage that can be done in minutes or hours, let alone 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And so imagine the havoc that can be wreaked if you can't address the threat in a more collapsed time frame. And so we've developed this construct, this model of 1-10-60, and it's a rule that we've been socializing over the past year. It's getting a lot of traction. The government's been very, very receptive to it. And effectively, it's a new benchmark standard for can you detect an incident in a minute or less? Can you do a full investigation on that incident in 10 minutes or less? And can you remediate and eject the adversary in 60 minutes or less? So let's think bigger, let's be more ambitious, let's be aggressive with our goals, and let's work towards being more efficient and operating with speed and security.
I love it. 1-10-60. Chris, paint a picture of the future. What does it look like in 2 to 3 years? And maybe you can give us one quick lessons learned, since we didn't get to you on the lessons learned.
I think actually it all plays in well together, and to kind of build on what Don said, with the absence of a one-to-one skilled mapping of personnel to open jobs, one of the challenges is, and without following the new shiny object syndrome, we have to have a better integration of the ecosystem. Us vendors need to work better together, and that's one of the things that in Infoblox, being kind of the middle technology around a bunch of different competing technologies, is we help enable that from the CDM enabling technologies, patch management, visibility. One of the big challenges is that more isn't always better, and free isn't always free. And so recognizing that there's a long tail on some of the things that you get for free, how does that impact proactivity to reactivity? And what you really want to do, and what we've seen historically and should get to in the future, is moving that window of proactivity much further into the future, and so that the reactivity supports the 1-10-60 piece, that model of how do I remediate, how do I get full contextual awareness of not only what's happening in my environment around the threat, and understanding how to respond. That's really key, because as we've seen in a number of different cases, there has been an alert, there's been a notification, there's been something that just hasn't raised the bar of I need to focus on this now. This needs to be my number one priority.
Right, that needle in the stack of needles, right?
Yep.
One of those scenarios. Don, at DOD, if you could look out over the horizon 3 years, I know you guys do a lot of that, and what does that look like, right? What does it look like for the soldier coming into, the DOD ecosystem, the sailor, the airman?
Well, I'm going to foot stomp what Paul had said, right? I mean, we are continuing to deploy capabilities, improve our current capabilities to achieve a zero trust environment, right? Where everything, devices, processes, and people are identified and inspected for compliance before they're allowed to connect.
That's your zero trust,
That's
right?
our zero trust.
Right.
Data is protected at rest and in transit, and we're leveraging automation and machine learning to allow our net defenders to effectively operate at net speed. I think that's where we need to be.
The cyber maturity model certification, and that's sort of early on. Is there a time frame that's supposed to, that's across the defense industrial base, which I think is awesome, right? And you were talking about sort of punitive, and it's more about, hey, you're just not going to play in this market unless you can prove to us that you're hardened, you're certified, et cetera. What's the timeline that we're looking at to try to get that? Because I see something like that rolling its way over to the civilian federal side as well, right? Absolutely. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
I don't know what the exact time frame is. I know what they've said is it's a phased-in approach. We know we have a large installed base. It's going to take a while, but there will definitely be a time frame in which, to achieve your certification in the future to be able to do business with the department.
Right. It's not just going to be a full chop kind of thing. You have to feather this in, and there is a huge investment. in doing this, but the payoff is significant, right? Yes. And as the adversaries continue to get sophisticated, they already are sophisticated, they just sort of lie in wait there so that, getting this environment hardened is really important. There's numerous examples of where the different parties in the DIB have been, penetrated, right? Where we know that goes back to World War II and probably before that. John, how about at Palo Alto? What does it look like from where you all sit? What do you guys got cooking in the Petri dish there that you might want to reveal here right on the show?
Luke, I'm going to take an optimistic look at the future.
Sure.
We have a vision to support organizations so that each day is safer and more secure than the day before. Mm-hmm. So I think I think it's possible to get to a position where we can prevent most of what we're seeing today. And let me say right up front, I think Paul mentioned it earlier, basics matter. I think that, basic standard, discipline, hygiene, whatever you want to call it, strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, software patching and vulnerability management, and just being suspicious of what shows up on your device. I believe that if people do the right things, you can take care of about 80% of what we're seeing today. But people don't do the right things. And any system built on an expectation of that is going to fail. So to get to a better position, it's back to what I said earlier. We've got to make better use of automation and software-based advanced analytics. Now, this has to be an integrated approach, because you have to be able to use these capabilities in a way that you're not looking through a bunch of soda straws at different parts of the attack process for an attack, a threat attack process, or the kill chain, whatever you want to call it. You have to take an integrated or packaged approach. And this requires that organizations like mine have to be interoperable with other organizations to make things integrated, to make things easily orchestrated. And I think one of the visions of the future that we believe in is an open API architecture.
Sure.
So that you make plug and play a reality. And we're all sitting, all the cyber threat or cyber security companies are sitting on enormous amounts of data, indicators of compromise and contextual information. That needs to be opened up so that you can plug and play with that data.
Right.
And you can build an API structure so that we fight machines with machines, we fight software with software, and we save our people for what only people can do.
Right, and you as you can hopefully, as James was talking about, simplify some of these things. I think that's really important in that, these problems aren't unique, but they need to be exposed so everyone understands that. Ron, how about at the Army? What does it look like? What does a soldier of the future look like? Are they like a walking data center? Almost, like a micro data center out there. It seems like they almost are these days, right?
There's tremendous efforts going on in that area with Army modernization efforts.
Yeah, right.
And it all, in the Army, it always starts with the soldier. But one thing I want to highlight on the enterprise side that may be part of the future, and that is, how do we really leverage the capabilities and abilities of industry? And so we started a few months ago, and the Air Force had started a similar program a year or so before this. And it's a pilot where we're experimenting with technology with industry called Enterprise IT as a Service. And we're looking at a variety of things, because the way the government typically does appropriations and contracting, it is very challenging to stay close with the pace of change of technology. But industry is able to do that and do that well. And so we started with 3 Army bases this year, and we'll do 3 more next year and 3 more the following year. But it's an experiment with, again, this as a service, network as a service, end user services as a service, and compute and storage as a service. And how can we leverage industry to do what is traditionally done by the government, so that then we can have the critical government workforce do all the things that we're challenged to do, and that's really defending the data, right, that we move to. So this is an experiment we're on. We'll see over the next 3 years how this fares out, but it really is about leveraging the really skill sets and ability of industry.
Makes a lot of sense, right? Let the experts do what they do best, so that the folks in the service can do what they do best, which is protect this nation. Paul, bring us home in regards to, what does it look like out there? When I know you've got a lot of things that you're doing today. You talked about this year. What does it look like over the horizon, right? The SOCs are consolidated. There's a whole bunch of activity going on. Tell us what it looks like.
I think John and James touched on it, and I think so. As far as the vision, that's where it's going to go. We need to decrease the time window from flash to bang with respect to detection and response. We need to be able to do detection and response at machine speeds, and that's going to be driven by the requirement to keep up with the attacker. The attacker is going to be leveraging these machine learnings, artificial intelligence technologies to decrease their flash to bang on an attack. So the attacks are going to get automated at machine speed. Yep. We need to be able to keep up with them and keep the defense at machine speed as well. So it's always going to be this. It's going to continue to be this cat and mouse game where it's always one-upping from the attacker to the defender. A couple of parting comments. I really like what all of my esteemed colleagues had said. I agree with what Chris was saying, and nothing is free. When a lot of my friends and family don't understand is that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And I just need to be aware that these social media sites, these free applications that you're downloading to your phone are gathering all of this intelligence and data on you, and you just need to be aware of what they're doing with that. Mm-hmm. The last point I want to make is, after last week was one of the hardest weeks we've had to deal with as cybersecurity practitioners. I call it was the patch week from hell. Between Microsoft, Oracle, Intel, Citrix, we were getting bombarded with patches, many of them being 0 days, some of which there weren't even patches out there for. So at some point, we, as a community, need to get around the concept that, secure, fast, cheap, you can only have 2 of those. At some point, we need to be either willing to wait for the secure code or be willing to pay for it, because fast and cheap isn't working for us.
Get what you pay for. All right, well, it's been a fantastic show, and I'd like to thank the guests for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us for this program. I'd like to thank the sponsors for which we don't have a show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Radio that make this program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience that tune in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.